All right, what is going on, fellas? Shout out to Paris as always. If it wasn't for Paris and Max, I probably would put out a video once a month when I actually come up with something to make a video on. So I texted Paris and I said, hey man, you got any video ideas that you don't feel like doing that I could cop? And he said, putting up a top favorite ab exercise video was something that got a lot of likes when he asked about it, but it wasn't something he was planning on doing anytime soon. And this is actually something that I touched on my video yesterday. So I'm going to give you guys what my favorite ab exercises are. This is coming at it predominantly from a strength perspective, but I think they are extremely viable from a hypertrophy perspective, and I don't see any reason they wouldn't be. Now, before any of you get on me about this, you say, hey, Sam, wait a minute, you don't have abs. And you are correct, but shut the fuck up. Somewhere under here, got biggest abs you've ever seen, Eddie Hall type shit. That aside, we're gonna get into the ones that I enjoy the most. I've got kind of my big three, and then we're gonna touch on some honorable mentions. And as I talked about yesterday in the video, right? Some people really do not respond well mentally to mundane training. Physically, most of us respond well to repetitive training. Strength training is and hypertrophy training is an inherently repetitive process. But that being said, I think some people's effort tends to wane off on their ab work when it's the same thing time after time. So having a bigger list can provide value to a lot of people because it can keep it fresh, which will keep their effort a little bit higher if they've got a bigger rotation of ab exercises to work through. So my big three in no particular order. First is going to be the hanging leg raise. Basically, one of the many reasons I like this is we're training the abs through a reasonable range of motion. We're kind of controlling our pelvis, which is one of the functions of the abs that we're looking to kind of be able to do in our lifts. I find they have a very therapeutic effect on lots of people who feel as though they've got chronically tight lower backs. And the other thing that's quite cool about them is they are the inverse to, let's say, a deadlift. They're the reverse of a hip hinge. And if you are someone who subscribes to the idea that antagonistic training holds some value and that doing rows with your benches and pull downs with your overhead presses is something that can help you develop those main lifts, logically you should probably be looking for some kind of antagonistic hip hinge, right? So I think they fill that role. For me, just checking off a certain number of difficult sets per week on hanging leg raises very much has always been an effective ab exercise, and whatever benefits I gain personally from ab training within my program, I can derive those from hanging leg raises. Added bonus of grip training if that's something you're interested in, or obviously you can strap up or do them on that Roman chair type thing. Either or, I think those are a phenomenal motion. Number two would probably be ab wheel. Lots of people will say, hey, certain motions aren't great for training the abs because specifically in strength training, the strength we are looking for is isometric strength of the abs. We're not really concerned with our abs strength as a flexor of the trunk. We're more concerned with the ability of our abs to resist motion. They'll say this is why planks are fucking awesome, is because we're training that ability to resist motion. And the same thing could be said about an ab rollout if you're doing them properly. There isn't really flexion extension occurring at your trunk. What you're doing is you're resisting extension against a variable resistance curve. So when you're at the top, there's almost no extension impulse, and as you get down to the bottom, there's a really strong extension impulse, just like you might be experiencing while you're lifting. At different points in the range of motion, your abs are going to be asked more or less of a task in resisting motion. So I find them very specific in that regard. I think that they offer a very good opportunity for people to understand and establish a good lockdown rib position. It's a good opportunity each rep to practice bracing mechanics, and they just wreck your abs. I think most people who have messed around with ab rollouts after either not having done them for a while or never having done them, you're pretty fucked up the next day. Getting out of bed is a little hard. So I would say that they're a very effective exercise, alongside the fact that I think that they can start helping you get better at certain motor skills associated with what we're looking for our trunk to do. The one thing I would tell you as someone who's done a million ab rollouts in my life, I could probably go bang out a set of 5 on standing ab rollouts, but I shouldn't, right? The threshold to be able to go down and up on a standing rollout is not the same as the threshold of you should be training these. I think a lot of people see how cool it is to be able to do them and jump the gun on progressing to doing them standing, but they defeat the purpose of the exercises because as they come down and as they reach that bottom position, you see notable amount of extension and motion at their back. And the whole purpose of doing these is to get good at resisting motion. So unless you can do them very strict and while resisting motion, I don't think it's worthwhile. And I think that's a mistake that a lot of people make with them, is jumping the gun early on doing them standing. You can also do them assisted from the knees or assisted standing via putting a band up on a pull-up bar, putting it around your waist. It's actually not very hard to do. That can offer some benefits. You can also just do negatives if you're not strong enough to do either of those options. There's lots of things you can do to scale them. I would say that's the big weakness of the exercise, is it's not like the GHD sit-up, which we're going to touch on next, which has very good scaling options. We have reps, we have sets, and we have weight. So we've got a lot of precision in how to achieve overload. Something like the hanging leg raise or something like the ab rollout, it doesn't scale quite as easily. There are ways to scale it, absolutely. There's ways to make it easier via partial ranges of motion. There's ways to make it easier via a band assist. There's a way to make it harder via a tempo, via putting some weight on your back or doing it from your feet. But it's a little bit more difficult than what we're touching on as the third part of my top 3, which is going to be a GHD sit-up. Again, people will hear sit-up and be like, oh man, I've kind of always heard that it's better to train your abs isometrically if you're interested in strength training. Well, if you're doing your GHD sit-up fairly normally, we are challenging the abs more isometrically than we are anything else. Our back angle stays somewhat fixed. We come back, all of that hinging is, or most of that hinging is happening at the hips. And basically, again, we're locking in an angle of our spine, holding it, bracing, and then we have a variable resistance curve. With weight or without weight, as we come down to that bottom position, we're resisting extension. Very similar task to what we were doing on the ab rollouts. Lots of good scaling options. And then another benefit that we derive from these is that it's some additional hip flexor training, which is a very underdeveloped body part for the majority of people. And again, if you subscribe to this idea that antagonistic motions are helpful, this does fill that gap of an antagonistic deadlift. And for me personally, I find that doing the opposite of a hinge has helped me refine my hinge mechanic quite a bit. So these also offer similar benefits in terms of ab strength as well as hip flexor strength. That would be my big 3. Predominantly within my own program, I just kind of cycle between those 3 exercises, but lots of honorable mentions I think could be thrown in here. Anything ranging from like planks are phenomenal. Planks with load are also phenomenal. There's lots of loaded carries that you can do that are very, very effective. Bang for your buck core exercises. Probably too many to list, but just about any weighted carry is going to tax your core to a pretty significant degree. And that would be, a lot of people find that they can't get themselves to do these a little bit more mundane core exercises, and including some form of loaded carry every time they would do abs is a way to get themselves to do it. It's got more transference to other things. I think that's also a very valid option. Something like dead bugs is something that I will always advocate for, because I feel that, again, it helps us kind of build up awareness of how our abs can influence the position of our pelvis, how our abs can influence the position of our ribs, and what actually is the position we're trying to lock in, and how it's not a perfectly straight spine, because a neutral spine is not a straight spine. If you took an x-ray of a perfectly healthy human being, the spine is curved. So we're trying to reinforce that more like neutral posture, if you will. So I'd say dead bugs and planks are a massive one that like could definitely be included. Hollow holds, again, lots of the same benefits. Big fan of hollow holds. V-ups are a great exercise. Windshield wipers. And I think that if we're going to touch on ab exercises, I think it'd be kind of lame of me to make a separate video for obliques, because not a goddamn person would click that. But if we're looking to get additional training volume for obliques, if we're doing any loaded carry, basically by function of our obliques having to stabilize our pelvis from tilting while we walk, we're getting quite a bit of work there for our obliques, for our QL. So any loaded carry is going to be a great option. But my big 2 for obliques would either be a suitcase carry with like a dumbbell, or a farmer's implement, or a barbell, whatever you can carry on one side, or a Ed Cone sideways rack hold if you don't have a space to walk with it. It's basically the same exercise. Both of these scale better than a side plank. A side plank also very great honorable mention. That being said, the scalability of putting weight on your hip is pretty limited. It starts to get very impractical, whereas we can scale either a suitcase carry or the Ed Cohn sideways barbell hold indefinitely, and they are both top tier grip exercises. So I feel this is one of those times where we can hit two birds with one stone, and it's not a one stone, zero bird exercise. I think you can get phenomenal grip and oblique work out of either of these exercises. I also like the inclusion of windmills, if we're going to include some flexion. I've always found that windmills offer a lot of benefits as far as developing the musculature that stabilizes the shoulder, as well as training the obliques and kind of the QL as a mover. I would usually pick a windmill over something like a oblique side bend, because again, we're going to be able to pick up some of those extra benefits of becoming a better overhead athlete by doing them. I don't think the extra load of doing really heavy side bends is particularly beneficial. I don't think it's bad for your back, but I don't think that getting crazy strong on side bends is going to yield you the returns that you're putting into it. I think there'd be a better use of your training economy, i.e. something like a windmill. So that would be kind of off the top of my head, my favorite ones. I think that if we're talking obliques and core as a whole, we can think about things in a couple different functions, right? Cable crunches are a great exercise. I've gotten to the point where you need to use an amount of weight that's very impractical for me to get into position and not lift off the ground. But I think for most people, cable crunches can have a place. But when we're looking at the core, we're looking maybe at picking our exercises by function, sometimes rather than muscle group. So we can like flex the core, right? We can resist extension. So that's kind of the first two we would look at is, okay, well, maybe we have an exercise as a flexor, like a cable crunch. Maybe we have an exercise resisting extension, like a plank or a rollout or a GHD sit-up. We can flex laterally, so maybe something like a windmill. We can resist flexing laterally, so something like a suitcase carry or a cone hold. And then we have the rotational plane, right? Which I do want to touch on this. This video is a little bit longer than I wanted to, but there's a bunch of points. I always feel like I would be doing a disservice if I just completely left them out. And or someone smart might watch this and say, man, he didn't say a goddamn thing about the transverse plane. What a moron. I'm here to defend myself. So transverse plane, rotational at the trunk. Lots of people will say, okay, again, what we're looking to do is we're trying to train the task of resisting motion. So if we're looking to train in the transverse plane, we should be looking at anti-rotation, something like Palloff press, where you are like sideways to a cable machine, you extend it out, so there's a bigger impulse to rotate you, you resist it, you come back in. There's a couple other options, but that's the most popular one. And these can have their place. I don't think those can scale well enough to be a good training stimulus as much as they are a good rehab stimulus. But that being said, when you get something stronger concentrically, it will also get stronger isometrically. The best way to get stronger isometrically is to do something isometric, but train, like let's say if we did 1,000,000 sit-ups, we will get better at planks. And usually muscles are stronger isometrically than they are concentrically anyway. So, for example, if we were to do some sideways med ball throws and train in the rotational plane, we're also going to get some of those benefits of getting stronger at anti-rotation. And something that I've heard a lot of smart guys talk about that I've gradually drank the Kool-Aid and can sign off on, which is a lot of the time with our accessories, we're not looking to use what we use the most in our main motions. We're trying to use what we missed. So if you've got a very back dominant squat technique, maybe we're looking for something that's a highly quad bias squat pattern as our accessory. So if someone's a low bar squatter with a lot of forward lean, maybe something like a front squat or a hack squat might be what we might be looking for as a secondary motion. And following this premise of hitting what we missed, not hitting what we already hit, because we probably should have just done more of that main stuff if we're really going to double down with our stimulus. We could have just, if you're going to do a good morning after your low bars, there's a good argument to be made that maybe you should have just done more low bars. So we're filling up those gaps that we missed, and the gap that's completely missed by all powerlifting training, because it's all occurring in the sagittal plane, is including something rotational. And I like to throw that in there when possible, some kind of like med ball toss sideways or some kind of twisting type motion, just to pick up what we missed and retain functions that would otherwise maybe decay across a long powerlifting career. The same thing could probably be said about lateral plane training, but that is for another day. The windmill kind of checks that box. Thank you guys for watching. I appreciate you. I apologize for the rambling, but this one was a fun one to make. Thank you.